Actually, we are done, Simone said, her voice growing stronger with each word. David's face flushed red. In front of his entire family, his wife was defying him. The humiliation was more than his ego could handle. You know what? David snarled, moving around the table toward her. You want to embarrass me in front of my family? You want to show everyone what kind of ungrateful wife you really are? Before anyone could react, before even Simone could process what was happening, David gathered saliva in his mouth and spat directly in her face. The sound was wet and horrible in the silence of the dining room. Simone felt the warm wetness hit her cheek and begin to drip down toward her chin. Time seemed frozen as 23 people sat in stunned silence, processing what they had just witnessed. Little Brandon gasped audibly. Lisa covered her mouth with her hands. Even Gloria Carter, who had never particularly liked Simone, looked horrified. But Simone didn't move. She didn't wipe her face or cry or run from the room. Instead, she stood perfectly still, letting the moment crystallize in her memory and in the memory of everyone present. Let them see exactly who David Carter really was. Let them remember this moment when the truth finally came to light. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried clearly through the silent room. Thank you, she said, looking directly into David's shocked eyes, for showing me exactly who you are. Then she turned and walked out of the dining room, her heels clicking steadily on the hardwood floor. She didn't rush. She didn't slam the door. She simply left with a dignity that no amount of humiliation could touch. Behind her, the Carter family sat in stunned silence, not knowing that they had just witnessed the moment their entire world began to change. Simone's hands shook as she turned the key in the lock of her downtown Atlanta penthouse, a space David had never seen and never would. The building was listed under her maiden name, Montgomery, and paid for through the same trust structure that funded her entire secret life. She walked directly to the master bathroom, her reflection in the wall-length mirror showing the dried remnants of her husband's saliva still streaking her dark skin. For a moment, she just stared at herself, really looked at the woman she had become over 5 years of marriage. When had she started shrinking? When had she begun hiding not just her success but herself? The shower water ran hot as she scrubbed away more than just David's spit. She was washing off years of pretending, years of making herself small enough to fit into the box David needed her to occupy. The expensive shampoo and body wash were luxuries she allowed herself only here, in this space where she could be herself. After wrapping herself in a silk robe that cost more than most people's monthly salary, Simone walked to her home office. The walls were lined with framed awards and recognitions for S. Montgomery, CEO of Carter Industries. Business magazines featuring her company, though never her face, always just artistic shots of the building or generic business imagery. She had built an empire while hiding in plain sight. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jasmine. Emergency wine and truth session? My place in 20? Simone smiled for the first time in hours. Jasmine Reed had been her anchor through everything, the only person who knew the complete truth about both her marriage and her business life. They had been roommates at Spelman College, and Jasmine had watched Simone build Carter Industries from a tiny startup into a $50 million consulting firm. 20 minutes later, Simone sat curled on Jasmine's couch, a glass of wine in her hands and her best friend's concerned eyes studying her face. He did what? Jasmine's voice rose several octaves as Simone finished recounting the dinner. Spat in my face, in front of his entire family. Simone took a sip of wine, surprised by how calm she felt now, including his 8-year-old nephew. Jasmine was pacing now, her attorney instincts fully activated. Simone, this is assault. We can press charges. We can? No, Simone said firmly. Not yet. What do you mean not yet? That man publicly humiliated you in the worst possible way. Simone set down her wine glass and looked at her friend. Jazzy, for 5 years I've been living 2 lives. I've let him take credit for my work, let his family treat me like I'm worthless, let him control me at home while I'm secretly running a $50 million company. Don't you think it's time I stopped being a victim? Jasmine stopped pacing and sat down beside her. What are you thinking? I'm thinking about what Mama Pat always told me. Baby girl, when someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. But when they disrespect you in front of witnesses, that's when you show them who you really are. Simone reached for her phone and pulled up the contact for Elena Rodriguez, her head of HR. Elena? I know it's late, but I need you to prepare something for me. Tomorrow morning, I want David Carter terminated from Carter Industries. Security should escort him out. And Elena? It's time for the board to meet their real CEO. After ending the call, Simone looked at Jasmine, who was grinning despite her concern. "You're really going to do this?" Jasmine asked. "I'm really going to do this. But first, I need to see Mama Pat." An hour later, Simone sat in the living room of the modest College Park home where she had spent countless afternoons as a child. Patricia Williams, now 67, had been the strongest woman in Simone's life since her parents died in a car accident when she was 12. Her grandmother's sister, Mama Pat, had raised Simone with a combination of fierce love and practical wisdom. "Child, you've been carrying this secret too long," Mama Pat said after hearing the whole story. Her weathered hands held Simone's as they sat together on the floral couch that had been there since Simone was in high school. "I thought I was protecting him," Simone admitted. "Protecting his pride. Protecting his pride while he stomped on yours? Baby, that ain't protection. That's enabling." Mama Pat stood and walked to an old wooden chest in the corner of the room. She returned with a small silk scarf, deep purple with gold trim, elegant and timeless. "This belonged to your great-grandmother," Mama Pat said, placing the scarf in Simone's hands. "She was a woman who ran her own business back when black women weren't supposed to do much of anything except what men told them to do. She taught me that sometimes you got to let the world see your strength, even if it makes some people uncomfortable." Simone fingered the soft silk, thinking about generations of strong women who had come before her. "You know what you got to do," Mama Pat continued. "Question is, are you ready to do it?" Simone wrapped the scarf around her neck, feeling the weight of her ancestors' strength settle around her shoulders. "I'm ready." Back at the penthouse that night, Simone sat at her computer and began typing an email to the board of Carter Industries. For 5 years they had known her only as S. Montgomery, the brilliant but mysterious CEO who preferred to work behind the scenes. Tomorrow they would learn that the woman they had been taking direction from was the same woman David Carter claimed was just an administrative assistant. But tonight she had one more call to make. "David," she said when he answered on the third ring. His voice was slurred with alcohol. "Simone? Where the hell are you? I've been calling." "I'm somewhere safe," she interrupted. "I'm calling to tell you that I won't be coming home tonight. Don't be dramatic." So I lost my temper a little. You know how you get sometimes. "David, I need you to listen carefully. Tomorrow is going to be a very different day for both of us. I suggest you get some rest." "What's that supposed to mean?" Simone touched the silk scarf around her neck, feeling her great-grandmother's strength flowing through the delicate fabric. "It means it's time for you to meet the real me." She hung up before he could respond, then turned off her phone. Tomorrow would bring confrontation, chaos, and probably pain. But tonight, for the first time in 5 years, Simone Montgomery Carter felt completely free. In her dreams that night, she saw her great-grandmother nodding with approval, surrounded by all the strong women who had paved the way for this moment of truth. David Carter woke up with a splitting headache and the vague memory of saying something terrible at dinner the night before. The details were fuzzy through the haze of wine and rage, but he remembered Simone leaving and not coming home. Her side of the bed was still made untouched. He reached for his phone, expecting to find apologetic text messages from his wife begging to come home. Instead, there was only one message sent at 6 a.m. "Check your email." Confused and irritated, David stumbled to his laptop. His work email contained a single message from Elena Rodriguez in HR, marked urgent and sent to his personal account. "Mr. Carter, please report to Human Resources immediately upon arrival today. Bring your company laptop, badge, and any other Carter Industries property in your possession." David's stomach dropped. This was the kind of email that meant only one thing. But that was impossible. He was being promoted to senior VP. The Morrison deal had been a huge success. His presentation to the board had been flawless. No. Simone worked in administration. She had no power, no connections, no influence. Whatever was happening had to be about something else. Maybe there was a security issue or they were updating their systems. David showered quickly and drove to the gleaming Carter Industries building in Buckhead, a 40-story glass monument to success that he had always been proud to call his workplace. He had spent 3 years working his way up from account manager to director to his current position, always believing he was climbing toward the top. The security guard at the front desk gave him an odd look but said nothing as David badged in and took the elevator to the 28th floor where HR was located. Elena Rodriguez was waiting for him in conference room B, along with 2 people David didn't recognize, a woman in an expensive suit who looked like an attorney and a security guard. "David, please sit down," Elena said, her voice carefully neutral. "What's this about?" The email seemed urgent, but "I have a 9 o'clock with the Morrison team. Your 9 o'clock has been cancelled, Elena interrupted. David, as of this morning, your employment with Carter Industries has been terminated. The words hit him like a physical blow. Terminated? That's impossible. There must be some mistake. I just got promoted. The Morrison deal. The Morrison deal was successfully negotiated by our CEO, Elena said. You were simply the presentation vehicle. David felt the world tilting underneath him. The CEO? But I work directly with the CEO. I report to him every week. The woman in the expensive suit leaned forward. Mr. Carter, I'm Jasmine Reed, representing Carter Industries in this matter. You've never actually met the CEO. All your communications have been through intermediaries. That's ridiculous. Who is the CEO then? I demand to speak with him immediately. Elena and Jasmine exchanged a look. The CEO has requested a meeting with you, Elena said. But first, we need your company property. David handed over his laptop and badge, his hands shaking slightly. This had to be some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe Simone had complained about last night, gotten him in trouble somehow. But she didn't have that kind of influence. She couldn't even stand up for herself at a family dinner. Mr. Carter, the security guard said, please follow me to the 39th floor. The 39th floor was executive territory, a place David had only visited twice in his 3 years with the company. The elevator opened onto a reception area with marble floors and abstract art that probably cost more than his annual salary. The security guard led him to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlanta skyline. Please wait here, the guard said, then left him alone. David paced the room, trying to make sense of what was happening. Through the windows, he could see the city spreading out below, a city where he had thought he was building his reputation and career. Had someone sabotaged him? Was this about his behavior at dinner last night? But how could anyone here even know about that? The conference room door opened, and David turned around expecting to see a male executive in an expensive suit. Instead, he saw his wife. Simone walked into the room wearing a tailored black dress that David had never seen before, her hair pulled back in a sleek bun, with a confidence in her posture that seemed completely foreign. She carried herself like an executive. Simone? What are you doing here? Did they call you in because of last night? Look, I'm sorry about that, but this is ridiculous. Sit down, David. Her voice was different. Authoritative. Cold. This wasn't the soft-spoken woman who apologized for everything and shrank into corners. I don't understand what's happening, David said, but he sat down across from her at the conference table. Simone remained standing, looking down at him with eyes that seemed to see right through him. What's happening is that you're meeting the real CEO of Carter Industries. David laughed, a nervous sound that echoed strangely in the large room. Simone, what are you talking about? The CEO is... She is Simone Montgomery Carter, Simone said, her voice steady and clear. That's me, David. I founded this company 7 years ago with my inheritance from my grandfather. I built it from nothing into a $50 million operation. Every deal you've presented, every strategy you've implemented, every success you've claimed, it all came from me. The room was spinning. This had to be some kind of elaborate joke or breakdown. That's impossible. You work in administration. I do administer. I administer the entire company. Simone walked to the windows, her back to him as she looked out over the city. For 5 years, I've let you live in a fantasy where you were the successful one and I was just along for the ride. I've let you take credit for my work, let your family treat me like I was worthless, let you control and diminish me at home while I was secretly running the business that employs you. David felt physically sick. This is insane. You're having some kind of breakdown because of last night? People don't just hide being CEOs from their husbands. Simone turned back to face him, and in her eyes he saw a strength that made him suddenly remember last night. The way she had stood perfectly still when he spat in her face, the quiet dignity with which she had walked away. People hide all kinds of things when they're in abusive relationships, she said quietly. I told myself I was protecting your pride, but really I was just enabling your cruelty. Abusive? Simone, that's... You spat in my face in front of your entire family because an 8-year-old asked me about my job. Her voice remained calm, but David could see the pain underneath. You've spent 5 years making me feel worthless while I was actually the one keeping you employed. David's mind raced, trying to process this information. If this is true, why didn't you tell me? Because I fell in love with who I thought you were, Simone said. And then I was afraid that if you knew the truth, you'd only want me for my money. So what happens now? David asked, though he was beginning to understand that he was no longer in control of this conversation, or anything else. Simone sat down across from him, and for a moment he saw a flash of the woman he had married, vulnerable and sad. "Now you have a choice," she said. "You can accept that our marriage is over, sign the divorce papers that will be delivered this afternoon, and walk away with a reasonable settlement. Or you can try to fight this, in which case you'll discover exactly how much power and influence I actually have." David stared at her, this woman he thought he knew, this woman he had treated as less than equal for 5 years. "Simone, please. We can work this out. I can change." "You spat in my face," she said simply. "In front of a child. That's not something people change from, David. That's something people are." She stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Your personal belongings from the office are being packed as we speak. Security will escort you out once you're ready to go." "Simone, wait." But she was already gone, leaving David alone in the conference room with the weight of his collapsed world and the stunning realization that he had never known his wife at all. 39 floors below, Simone sat in her car in the parking garage, finally allowing the tears to come. The hardest part was over. David knew the truth. But now came the really difficult part, dealing with the aftermath. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. "Mrs. Carter, your 2 p.m. board meeting is confirmed. All members will be attending." It was time to stop hiding from everyone else too. The boardroom at Carter Industries had never felt so quiet. 12 of Atlanta's most influential business leaders sat around the polished conference table, their confusion evident as they waited for the mysterious S. Montgomery to finally reveal themselves after 5 years of anonymous leadership. Simone stood outside the boardroom door, touching the silk scarf around her neck, her great-grandmother's scarf that had given her courage the night before. Through the glass panel, she could see the board members checking their phones and speaking in hushed whispers. These were people who had worked with her virtually for years but had never seen her face. Elena Rodriguez appeared beside her. "They're ready when you are, Mrs. Carter." "It's Ms. Montgomery in business settings," Simone corrected gently. "I think it's time to reclaim my maiden name entirely." Elena nodded with understanding. "Ms. Montgomery, they're ready when you are." Simone took a deep breath and opened the door. The conversation stopped immediately as she entered. 12 faces turned toward her with varying degrees of surprise, confusion, and curiosity. She recognized each of them, had studied their backgrounds, their business philosophies, their personal interests. They had been taking direction from her for years without knowing it. "Good afternoon," Simone said, taking her seat at the head of the table. "I'm Simone Montgomery, and I believe it's time we met properly." James Henderson, the 70-year-old chairman who had been her grandfather's business partner decades ago, was the first to speak. "Ms. Montgomery, I think there may be some confusion. We're waiting for our CEO." "I am your CEO," Simone said calmly. "I've been your CEO for 5 years. Every quarterly report, every strategic decision, every major contract, they've all come from me." The silence that followed was deafening. Simone could practically see the gears turning in their minds as they processed this information. Several board members looked around the table at each other, seeking confirmation that they had heard correctly. Margaret Foster, the sharp-eyed CFO of a major Atlanta bank, leaned forward. "Ms. Montgomery, are you saying that you are S. Montgomery? The person we've been communicating with via email and conference calls?" "That's exactly what I'm saying." "But David Carter told us he was your direct liaison," said Robert Kim, founder of a successful consulting firm. "He said he reported directly to you and conveyed your messages to us." Simone's expression didn't change. "David Carter was an employee. A director-level employee who I allowed to present my work to give him professional development opportunities. He was never my liaison or representative." James Henderson was staring at her with something that looked like recognition dawning. "Simone Montgomery. Montgomery Industries. Your grandfather was Thomas Montgomery." "Yes. Thomas Montgomery was my business partner for 15 years before he passed away. He talked about his granddaughter constantly. Said she was going to change the business world." James shook his head in amazement. "But that was you. This whole time it was you." The pieces were falling into place around the table. Simone could see understanding replacing confusion on their faces. "Ms. Montgomery," Margaret Foster said, her voice careful and professional, "if what you're saying is true, then David Carter has been misrepresenting his role in this company for years." "David Carter has been terminated," Simone replied. "As of this morning. He was also my husband," which complicated the situation considerably. The word husband sent a ripple of shock around the table. Board members exchanged glances as they began to understand the full scope of what had been happening. You've been married to an employee while secretly running the company? Asked Dr. Patricia Williams, the president of a local university. How is that even possible? Simone had prepared for this question, knowing it would be the hardest to answer. It's possible when you're in an abusive relationship and you convince yourself that hiding your success is easier than dealing with the consequences of revealing it. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. More supportive. More understanding. James Henderson spoke first. Simone, your grandfather would be incredibly proud of what you've built here. But he would also be heartbroken to know that you felt you had to hide it. The hiding is over, Simone said firmly. Which brings me to why I've called this meeting. I need to know if this board can support a CEO who is no longer operating in the shadows. Can you work with someone who plans to be fully present and visible in leading this company? Margaret Foster smiled for the first time since the meeting began. Ms. Montgomery, you've increased our revenue by 300% in 5 years while operating under impossible personal circumstances. I think I speak for everyone when I say we'd be honored to work with you openly. Nods and murmurs of agreement traveled around the table. There is one concern, said Robert Kim. If David Carter has been taking credit for your work both internally and externally, we may have some client relationships to repair. Some deals he claimed credit for publicly. I've already thought of that, Simone replied. Which is why I'm going to schedule meetings with all our major clients over the next month to introduce myself properly and clarify the leadership structure. What about the media? Asked Dr. Williams. This story is going to come out eventually. Woman secretly runs company while abusive husband takes credit? That's front-page Business Journal material. Simone had been dreading this aspect, but she knew it was inevitable. I'll handle the media when the time comes. Right now, my priority is making sure our business relationships remain stable and our employees understand what's happening. Speaking of employees, James Henderson said, how are you going to handle the fallout from David's termination? He had supporters here. He had people who thought he was successful because I made him look successful, Simone corrected. Once they understand the real structure of this company, I believe most of our employees will adapt just fine. The meeting continued for another hour as they discussed practical matters, communication strategies, client management, and the logistics of Simone's transition from secret CEO to public leader. When it finally ended, board members approached her individually to express their support and amazement. Margaret Foster was the last to leave. Simone, she said quietly, I've been in business for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like what you've accomplished. But I have to ask, are you prepared for what comes next? The scrutiny, the media attention, the questions about your marriage? Simone touched her great-grandmother's scarf again. Margaret, for 5 years I've been living a lie to protect someone who didn't deserve protection. I'm ready to live in the truth whatever that brings. As the boardroom emptied, Simone sat alone at the head of the table, looking out at the Atlanta skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jasmine. How did it go? Better than expected, Simone typed back. They're all in. But even as she felt the relief of finally being honest with her board, Simone knew the hardest conversations were still ahead. Her employees, her clients, David's family, and eventually the media. The truth was out in this room, but the real test would be how it played in the wider world. Her phone rang and she saw Elena Rodriguez's name on the screen. Ms. Montgomery, I'm sorry to bother you, but we have a situation. David Carter is in the lobby demanding to speak with the CEO. Security is with him, but he's causing quite a scene. Simone closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The hardest part wasn't over after all. It was just beginning. I'll be right down, she said. Time to face the first real test of her newfound transparency. The elevator ride down 39 floors felt like the longest of Simone's life. She could hear David's raised voice even before the doors opened onto the main lobby of Carter Industries. Through the glass walls, she could see a crowd of employees gathering at a safe distance, phones out, recording what was clearly becoming a spectacle. David stood in the center of the marble-floored lobby, his voice echoing off the high ceilings as he argued with 2 security guards. His tie was loosened, his usually perfect hair disheveled, and there was a wild look in his eyes that Simone had seen before during his worst moments at home. This is my company, David was shouting. I built this place. You can't just throw me out because of some administrative error. Simone approached slowly, her heels clicking against the marble with deliberate, measured steps. The sound seemed to cut through David's rant, and he turned toward her with a mixture of desperation and rage on his face. Simone, thank God. Tell them this is all a mistake. Tell them you're just having some kind of breakdown because of last night. The lobby had gone completely silent except for the sound of phones quietly recording. Simone was acutely aware that whatever happened in the next few minutes would likely end up on social media within hours. Every word, every gesture would be scrutinized. David, she said, her voice calm and professional, you need to leave. Leave? This is my office. These are my clients. I've been working here for 3 years. You've been working for me for 3 years, Simone corrected, her voice still steady despite the chaos surrounding them. And as of this morning, that employment has ended. David stepped closer to her, close enough that she could smell the alcohol on his breath even though it was only 3 in the afternoon. The security guards tensed, ready to intervene. You can't do this to me, David said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that still carried in the silent lobby. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I won't let you destroy my career because you're upset about a little argument. Simone felt the eyes of 50 employees on her, watching to see how she would handle this moment. Some of them had worked under David's supervision. Some of them had probably heard him talk about his administrative assistant wife with condescension or worse. David, last night you spat in my face in front of your entire family because your nephew asked me about my job, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the lobby. That wasn't an argument. That was abuse. And I won't be enabling it anymore. A collective gasp went through the gathered employees. Several people covered their mouths in shock. David's face went pale as he realized that his public humiliation from the night before was now becoming public knowledge in his workplace. That's between us, he hissed. That's private. Nothing about your behavior toward me has been private, Simone replied. You've spent 3 years telling people here that I was just some basic administrative worker while you were the real talent. You've made jokes about my lack of ambition to clients and colleagues. You've used our marriage as a prop to make yourself look successful. David looked around the lobby, seeing the faces of people who had respected him, people who had looked up to him, people who had believed his stories about his contributions to the company. Now they were looking at him with a mixture of disgust and disbelief. You're making me look like a fool, he said, his voice breaking slightly. I'm not making you look like anything, Simone replied. I'm just finally telling the truth about who you are. Lisa Carter chose that moment to emerge from the elevator, having heard about the commotion from colleagues upstairs. When she saw her brother in the center of the lobby, her face went pale. David, what are you doing? Lisa, tell them. David turned to his sister desperately. You work here. Tell them this is all crazy. Lisa looked between her brother and Simone could see the moment when understanding dawned on her face. Lisa had been working directly under S. Montgomery for 2 years, taking direction from emails and video calls where the camera was always off. She was looking at Simone with new eyes, seeing the confident executive instead of the quiet wife she had dismissed at family dinners. Oh my God, Lisa whispered. You're S. Montgomery? You're my boss. The confirmation from David's own sister sent another wave of shock through the lobby. David turned to stare at Lisa, then back at Simone, the full reality of his situation finally sinking in. Lisa, how long have you known? David asked, his voice hollow. I didn't know, Lisa said, her voice barely audible. I had no idea. S. Montgomery always communicated through email and phone calls. I never connected. She trailed off, looking horrified as she realized the implications of what she was saying. Simone felt a moment of sympathy for Lisa, who was clearly struggling with the revelation that she had been part of dismissing her own boss for years. But her focus remained on David, who was now looking around the lobby like a cornered animal. David, Simone said firmly, you need to leave now. Security will escort you out, and your belongings will be delivered to you later today. This isn't over, David said, his voice returning to its angry register. You think you can just destroy my life because you're rich? I'll fight this. I'll fight you. You're welcome to try, Simone replied, her voice never wavering. But you should know that I have an excellent legal team, unlimited resources, and 5 years of documentation about your behavior toward me. If you want to make this a public battle, I'm prepared for that. David stared at her for a long moment, and Simone saw something shift in his expression. The bluster was fading, replaced by the dawning realization that he had lost everything. His job, his marriage, his reputation, and his sense of who he was in the world. I loved you, he said quietly, the words sounding almost like an accusation. No, Simone replied, her voice sad but firm. You loved the idea of me that you created. You loved having someone to control and diminish. You never loved the real me because you never bothered to find out who I really was. The security guard stepped forward as David's shoulders slumped in defeat. He allowed them to escort him toward the exit, but turned back for one last look at Simone. You'll regret this, he said, but there was no power in the words anymore. The only thing I regret, Simone said, is waiting so long to stand up for myself. As the glass doors closed behind David and the security guards, the lobby remained silent for several more moments. Then, slowly, spontaneous applause began. It started with one person, then spread through the crowd of employees until the entire lobby was filled with the sound of clapping. Simone felt tears prick her eyes as she looked around at the faces of her employees. People who had been working for her all along without knowing it, people who were now seeing her for who she really was. Thank you, she said, her voice carrying over the applause. All of you, for your support and your discretion. I know this has been unusual, but I promise you that from now on, there will be no more secrets. No more hiding. Just honest leadership and the best work we can do together. The applause continued as Simone walked back toward the elevator, her head held high and her great-grandmother's scarf flowing behind her like a banner of victory. But even as she smiled and waved at her employees, Simone knew that David's parting words had carried the weight of a threat. This confrontation was over, but the war for her reputation and her peace of mind was just beginning. As the elevator doors closed, she heard her phone buzzing with notifications. Social media. News outlets. The story was already spreading. The real battle was about to begin. 3 days after the lobby confrontation, Simone sat in her penthouse living room watching the evening news coverage of her story. The business reporter was standing in front of the Carter Industries building, her voice serious as she delivered the update. In what's being called one of the most shocking corporate revelations of the year, Simone Montgomery Carter has been confirmed as the secret CEO and majority owner of Carter Industries, a $50 million consulting firm. The revelation came to light after Mrs. Carter's husband, David Carter, was terminated from the company following what sources describe as a domestic incident at a family gathering. Simone reached for the remote to turn off the television, but her phone rang before she could. The caller ID showed Gloria Carter's name. Hello, Gloria, Simone answered, preparing herself for what was sure to be a difficult conversation. Simone. Gloria's voice was tight with emotion. We need to talk. 2 hours later, Simone sat across from David's entire family in the same dining room where everything had started 3 days earlier. The atmosphere was completely different now. Where before she had been the dismissed outsider, now she was clearly the person with power and everyone else was struggling to understand their new reality. Gloria Carter sat at the head of the table, her usual commanding presence somewhat diminished. Robert Carter looked uncomfortable, repeatedly clearing his throat. Lisa sat quietly, still processing the revelation that she had been working for Simone all along. And little Brandon, thankfully, was with a babysitter, spared from witnessing another family crisis. The things they're saying on the news, Gloria began, her voice carefully controlled, about David, about what happened here the other night, are true, Simone finished quietly. Every word. Robert Carter leaned forward, his military bearing intact despite his obvious discomfort. Simone, I'm not going to defend what David did. Spitting on anyone, especially your wife, is unacceptable behavior. But this whole situation, claiming you own his company, it seems vindictive. It's not his company, Simone replied, her voice calm but firm. It never was. I founded Carter Industries 7 years ago, 2 years before I even met David. I built it from nothing using my inheritance from my grandfather. Every success David claimed, every deal he presented, every strategy he implemented, it all originated from me. Lisa finally spoke up, her voice small and confused. But why didn't you tell us? For 5 years we thought. You thought I was worthless, Simone said not unkindly. You thought I was the lucky woman who got to marry your successful son and brother. You made jokes about my lack of ambition. You treated me like I was fortunate to be included in this family. The words hung in the air, and Simone could see the uncomfortable recognition on their faces. They remembered the dismissive comments, the condescending attitudes, the way they had made her feel small at every gathering. But why hide it? Gloria asked, her voice breaking slightly. Why let us think? Why let David think? Because I loved him, Simone said simply. At least, I loved who I thought he was when we first met. And when I saw how his ego was tied to being the breadwinner, the successful one, I thought it was easier to just let him believe it. Easier? Robert's voice carried a note of accusation. You let my son live a lie for 5 years. You let him build his entire identity around a false sense of success. Simone felt a flash of anger but kept her voice level. I let him take credit for my work because I was afraid that if he knew the truth, he would either leave me or only want me for my money. What I didn't understand then was that he was already controlling and diminishing me. I was already in an abusive relationship, I just couldn't see it. Abusive? Gloria's voice rose slightly. That's a very serious accusation. He spat in my face in front of all of you, Simone replied. Because an 8-year-old asked me about my job. If that's not abuse, what would you call it? The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of undeniable truth. They had all witnessed that moment. They couldn't deny what they had seen. Lisa was the first to break the silence. Simone, I owe you an apology. Not just for that night, but for years of treating you like you didn't matter. I didn't know you were my boss, but that doesn't excuse how dismissive I was. Lisa? No, let me finish. I've been thinking about this for 3 days. All those emails from S. Montgomery, all those brilliant strategies and solutions, that was you. You've been guiding my career, helping me succeed, and I was too blind to see it. And instead of being grateful, I was awful to you. Tears were rolling down Lisa's cheeks now. I'm so sorry. I'm so ashamed. Gloria looked at her daughter, then back at Simone. We all owe you an apology. But Simone, you have to understand, this is devastating for David. He's lost everything. His job, his marriage, his sense of who he is. He's our son. And I was his wife, Simone replied. But he never treated me like a partner. He treated me like an accessory to his success story. He controlled what I wore to business functions, how I spoke to his colleagues, what I was allowed to say about my own life. He made me smaller and smaller until I almost forgot who I really was. Robert Carter shook his head. I don't understand how this went on for so long without us knowing. Because you didn't want to know, Simone said, her voice gentle but honest. It was easier to believe that David was the star and I was just along for the ride. It confirmed your biases about gender roles and success. It made you comfortable. The truth of that statement was written across their faces. They had been complicit in David's fiction because it aligned with their worldview. What happens now? Gloria asked quietly. Now David and I get divorced, Simone said. I continue running my company openly instead of hiding. And all of you decide whether you can accept the truth about who I am and who David is. And if we can't? Robert asked. Simone looked around the table at these people who had been her family for 5 years, people she had tried so hard to please and fit in with. Then you'll have lost more than just David, she said sadly. You'll have lost the chance to really know me. Lisa reached across the table and took Simone's hand. I don't want to lose you. I want to know the real you. I want to work for you knowing who you really are. I want to be your sister-in-law because I choose to be, not because I'm obligated to be. Gloria looked at her daughter holding Simone's hand, and something shifted in her expression. Simone, I may not understand all of this, but I do understand that we failed you. All of us. We should have seen what was happening. We should have been better. I don't need you to be perfect, Simone replied. I just need you to be honest about who you are and who I am. Robert Carter, who had been silent for several minutes, finally spoke. My son has problems. Serious problems that we've probably been ignoring for years. And you're not the woman we thought you were. No, Simone agreed. I'm not. You're stronger than we thought. Smarter than we thought. More successful than we ever imagined. Robert's voice carried a note of respect that had never been there before. I think we owe you more than an apology. We owe you a chance to start over. As Simone drove home that night, she felt a mixture of exhaustion and relief. The Carter family wasn't perfect, and they had a lot of work to do to rebuild their relationships with her. But at least now everyone was operating from a place of truth. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mama Pat. How did it go, baby girl? Better than expected, Simone typed back. They're willing to try. Good. Now the real work begins. Simone smiled as she pulled into her building's parking garage. Mama Pat was right. The confrontations were over, but the real work of rebuilding her life in the truth was just beginning. And for the first time in 5 years she was looking forward to that work. 2 months after the dinner incident, Simone sat in Judge Denise Thompson's courtroom wearing a charcoal gray suit and her great-grandmother's silk scarf. The divorce proceedings had been contentious from the start, with David's attorney arguing that Simone had deceived her husband about her wealth and that he deserved a significant portion of her assets. Your Honor, David's attorney, a sharp-faced man named Richard Hawthorne, stood to address the judge. My client entered this marriage in good faith, believing he was the primary breadwinner. Mrs. Carter systematically deceived him about her financial status, creating a fraudulent foundation for their entire relationship. Judge Thompson, a distinguished African-American woman in her 50s, looked unimpressed. Mr. Hawthorne, are you suggesting that a woman has a legal obligation to disclose her wealth to her husband? When that wealth involves the company where the husband works, yes, Your Honor. Mr. Carter's entire career was manipulated by his wife without his knowledge. Jasmine Reed, representing Simone, stood smoothly. Your Honor, may I respond to that characterization? Please do, Ms. Reed. The evidence will show that Mr. Carter was hired for his position based on his qualifications, not his marriage to my client. He performed his job duties adequately and was compensated fairly. The fact that his wife chose not to disclose her role as CEO is not fraud, it's self-protection. Judge Thompson consulted her notes. Mr. Hawthorne, do you have evidence that Mrs. Carter's non-disclosure constitutes legal fraud? Your Honor, the emotional damage alone. I asked for legal evidence, not emotional arguments. Simone watched the exchange with calm attention. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the legal challenge to her right to privacy within her own marriage. Your Honor, Jasmine continued, we'd like to present evidence of the actual dynamics of this marriage, including documented instances of emotional and psychological abuse that explain why my client felt the need to protect herself through non-disclosure. David, sitting at the plaintiff's table, visibly tensed. His attorney whispered urgently in his ear. Mr. Hawthorne, does your client wish to respond to allegations of abuse? Your Honor, one incident of poor judgment during a heated argument does not constitute a pattern of abuse. One incident? Judge Thompson's voice carried a note of steel. Mr. Hawthorne, are you referring to the incident where your client spat in Mrs. Carter's face during a family dinner? The courtroom fell silent. The incident had been widely reported in the media, but hearing it spoken aloud in legal proceedings made it feel even more stark and humiliating. Your Honor, that incident has been taken out of context. Ms. Reed, do you have witnesses to this incident? Yes, Your Honor. We have multiple family members prepared to testify, including Mr. Carter's own sister. Lisa Carter sat in the gallery behind Simone, having chosen to support her sister-in-law despite the family pressure to side with David. Her presence in the courtroom spoke volumes about how the family dynamics had shifted since the truth came out. Judge Thompson looked directly at David. Mr. Carter, did you spit in your wife's face during a family dinner? David's attorney tried to interject, but the judge held up her hand. I want to hear from Mr. Carter directly. David stood slowly, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. Your Honor, I lost my temper. It was a moment of poor judgment. Did you or did you not spit in your wife's face? Yes, David admitted quietly. But, thank you, Mr. Carter. You may sit down. The judge made notes on her pad before continuing. Ms. Reed, please present your evidence regarding the financial arrangements of this marriage. Jasmine approached the bench with a folder of documents. Your Honor, these financial records show that Mrs. Carter maintained separate business accounts throughout the marriage. All marital expenses were paid from joint accounts funded by both parties. Mr. Carter had access to all household financial information. The only accounts he didn't have access to were Mrs. Carter's business accounts, which she was under no legal obligation to share. What about the family home? Hawthorne asked. Surely Mrs. Carter's deception extends to their living arrangements? The family home was purchased jointly with funds from both parties, Jasmine replied. Mrs. Carter also maintains a separate residence that Mr. Carter has never seen and which was purchased entirely with her premarital assets. Judge Thompson looked intrigued. Mrs. Carter maintained a separate residence throughout the marriage? Simone stood to address the court. Yes, Your Honor. I maintain my own space as a sanctuary where I could be myself without fear of judgment or control. Can you elaborate on that statement? Simone took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. This was her chance to tell her story in full, under oath, in a place where the truth mattered. Your Honor, from early in our marriage, my husband began controlling aspects of my appearance, my speech, and my behavior. He dictated what I could wear to business functions, monitored my conversations with colleagues, and consistently dismissed my opinions and contributions. When I tried to share my business ideas or insights, he would interrupt me or change the subject. Over time, I began to feel like I was disappearing. The courtroom was completely silent as Simone spoke, her voice clear and steady. I maintained my separate residence and my privacy about my business success because I needed somewhere to be myself fully. Somewhere I could make decisions without asking permission, where what I wanted, speak my mind, and remember who I was before I started shrinking myself to fit into his expectations. Judge Thompson nodded slowly. Mrs. Carter, did you ever discuss these concerns with your husband? I tried, Your Honor. But every time I attempted to address his controlling behavior, he would minimize my concerns or turn it back on me, saying I was being too sensitive or that I should be grateful for his guidance. David's attorney objected. Your Honor, this is unsubstantiated. Mr. Hawthorne, your client has already admitted to spitting in Mrs. Carter's face. I'm inclined to believe her characterization of his behavior patterns. The judge's words hit David like a physical blow. Simone could see him slumping in his chair, the reality of his situation finally becoming clear. Ms. Reed, what is your client seeking in this divorce? A simple, clean dissolution of the marriage, Your Honor. Mrs. Carter is willing to provide a reasonable settlement for Mr. Carter despite his behavior, but she's seeking to retain control of her business assets and her separate residence. What about spousal support? Jasmine smiled slightly. Given that Mrs. Carter was actually the primary breadwinner throughout the marriage, we believe any discussion of spousal support should favor our client. The irony of that statement wasn't lost on anyone in the courtroom. David, who had spent 5 years believing he was supporting his wife, was now in the position of potentially needing support from her. Judge Thompson reviewed her notes one final time. Based on the evidence presented, I'm prepared to rule on the major issues of this divorce. The courtroom held its breath. First, Mrs. Carter's business assets, which were established before the marriage and maintained separately throughout, will remain entirely in her control. Second, Mrs. Carter's separate residence and all furnishings therein will remain her sole property. Third, the marital home will be sold and proceeds divided equally between the parties. David's attorney started to object, but Judge Thompson continued. Fourth, given the evidence of Mr. Carter's abusive behavior and the fact that Mrs. Carter was actually the higher earner throughout the marriage, no spousal support will be awarded to Mr. Carter. However, Mrs. Carter has generously offered a settlement of $200,000, which I find more than fair given the circumstances. David's face went white. $200,000 sounded like a lot of money, but compared to the $50 million company he had thought he might have a claim to, it was a devastating defeat. Finally, Judge Thompson said, her voice carrying the weight of final judgment, I want to address Mr. Carter directly. David stood reluctantly. Mr. Carter, you had the privilege of being married to an extraordinary woman who built a successful business while supporting your career and enduring your controlling behavior. The fact that she felt the need to hide her success from you should serve as a lesson about the kind of husband and man you have been. I hope you use this opportunity to reflect on your actions and become better. As the gavel fell, Simone felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she was carrying. It was over. The marriage, the lies, the hiding, all of it was officially behind her. Outside the courthouse, Lisa Carter was waiting with tears in her eyes. Simone, I'm so proud of you, she said, wrapping her sister-in-law in a hug. You were incredible in there. Thank you for being here, Simone replied. It means everything to have your support. I meant what I said before, I want to really know you now. The real you. Maybe we could have dinner sometime? Just us. Simone smiled, feeling hopeful about the future for the first time in months. I'd love that. As she walked down the courthouse steps with Jasmine beside her, Simone felt her phone buzz with a text from Mama Pat. How did it go, baby girl? Justice, Simone typed back. Finally, justice. The response came immediately. Now comes the best part, living free. Simone looked up at the Atlanta skyline, feeling the sunshine on her face and the silk scarf flowing in the breeze. For the first time in 5 years, she was completely, authentically herself in every aspect of her life. And it felt like coming home. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Simone stood at the podium of the Georgia World Congress Center, looking out at an audience of 500 business leaders gathered for the annual Atlanta Women in Business Conference. The keynote speech had been scheduled months in advance, but now it carried extra weight as her first major public appearance since her story became national news. Good morning, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the large auditorium. My name is Simone Montgomery, and I'm here to talk to you about the cost of hiding who you really are. In the front row, she could see Mama Pat beaming with pride, surrounded by Lisa Carter, Jasmine Reed, and Elena Rodriguez. The women who had supported her through the hardest year of her life were here to witness her triumph. 6 months ago, most of you knew me only as a headline, the woman who secretly ran a $50 million company while her husband took credit for her work. But today, I want to talk about what led to that moment and what I've learned since. Simone had spent weeks crafting this speech, wanting to strike the right balance between personal honesty and professional insight. She was here not just as a survivor, but as a successful CEO with hard-won wisdom to share. I founded Carter Industries 7 years ago with my grandfather's inheritance and a vision of creating a consulting firm that prioritized both excellence and ethics. Within 3 years, we had grown to $20 million in annual revenue. I was proud of what I had built, but I was also afraid of what my success might cost me personally. She paused to take a sip of water, gathering her thoughts for the hardest part of the story. When I met my ex-husband, I fell in love with his charm and confidence. But I quickly learned that his ego was fragile when it came to career success. Rather than risk losing him, I made a choice that I thought was loving but was actually deeply damaging to both of us. I decided to hide my professional achievements. A murmur went through the audience. Many of these women had faced similar choices in their own relationships. For 5 years, I lived a double life. At work, I was the decisive CEO making strategic decisions and building client relationships. At home, I was the quiet wife who apologized for taking up space and asked permission to speak my mind. I told myself I was protecting his feelings, but really I was enabling his worst instincts and losing myself in the process. Simone looked out at the faces in the audience. Women of all ages and backgrounds, many nodding in recognition of their own struggles with similar dynamics. The breaking point came at a family dinner when my husband spat in my face because his 8-year-old nephew asked me about my job. In that moment, I realized that all my efforts to make myself smaller hadn't protected either of us. It had just created a foundation of lies that was bound to collapse eventually. The room was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Since then, I've been living authentically for the first time in years. I've rebuilt relationships with family members who now know the real me. I've strengthened my company by leading openly instead of from the shadows. And I've discovered that the woman I was afraid my husband wouldn't love was actually the woman the world needed me to be. Spontaneous applause broke out, but Simone raised her hand to continue. But I'm not here to tell you that leaving an abusive relationship is easy or that everyone will support you when you decide to live authentically. I'm here to tell you that it's worth it even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. She clicked to the next slide on her presentation, which showed a graph of Carter Industries' performance over the past 6 months. Since I began leading my company openly, we've seen a 30% increase in revenue, landed 3 major new clients, and expanded our workforce by 40%. It turns out that authentic leadership is not just personally fulfilling, it's good for business. More applause, this time sustained and enthusiastic. We've also launched the Montgomery Foundation, which provides business mentorship and microloans to women entrepreneurs, especially women of color who face systemic barriers to accessing capital. The slide changed to show photos of women who had benefited from the foundation's programs. Young entrepreneurs with innovative ideas, experienced professionals starting second careers, mothers building businesses around their family schedules. One of our grant recipients, Janet Williams, started a sustainable clothing line with a $5,000 loan from our foundation. Last month, her company secured a contract with a major retailer worth over $2 million. When we invest in women's authentic potential, the returns are exponential. The audience erupted in applause, with many women rising to their feet. So my challenge to you today is this. What parts of yourself are you hiding? What aspects of your brilliance are you keeping secret to make others comfortable? What would your life look like if you decided to show up fully as who you really are? Simone paused, letting the question sink in. I know it's scary. I know there are real risks and real costs. But I also know that the world needs what you have to offer, and it needs all of it, not just the parts that are easy for other people to accept. She clicked to her final slide, which showed a photo of her great-grandmother's silk scarf. This scarf belonged to my great-grandmother, who ran her own business in the 1940s when black women weren't supposed to do much of anything except what men told them to do. She faced challenges I can't even imagine, but she never made herself smaller to accommodate other people's limitations. Simone touched the scarf around her neck, feeling the strength of generations flowing through the delicate fabric. Each of us carries the dreams and sacrifices of the women who came before us. We owe it to them and to the women who will come after us, to live as boldly and authentically as we can. The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 5 minutes. Women throughout the auditorium were wiping tears from their eyes, inspired by Simone's journey from hiding to healing. During the Q&A that followed, a young woman in the back row raised her hand. Ms. Montgomery, do you ever regret not revealing your success earlier? Do you think about how different things might have been? Simone considered the question carefully. I used to torture myself with that question. But I've come to believe that we're all exactly where we need to be when we need to be there. I wasn't ready to live authentically 5 years ago. I needed to go through what I went through to become the woman I am today. I don't regret the journey, I'm grateful for what it taught me. Another hand went up. How do you deal with the media attention and public scrutiny of your personal life? By remembering that my story isn't just about me, Simone replied. Every time someone shares my story, it gives other women permission to examine their own lives and relationships. If my experience helps even one woman recognize that she deserves better, then the discomfort of public attention is worth it. After the formal presentation ended, Simone was surrounded by women wanting to share their own stories, ask for advice, or simply express gratitude for her honesty. She spent an hour in the lobby, listening to each person who approached her with the same attention and respect she wished she had given herself years earlier. Elena Rodriguez approached as the crowd finally began to thin. Simone, that was incredible. I'm so proud to work for you. Thank you, Elena. For everything. For supporting me through the transition, for keeping the company stable while I figured out how to be a public CEO. Speaking of which, Elena said with a smile, we just got confirmation on the Peterson Industries contract. $50 million over 3 years. Largest deal in company history. Simone felt a surge of pride and gratitude. 6 months ago, she had been hiding in the shadows, afraid that revealing herself would destroy everything she had built. Instead, stepping into the light had allowed her company to reach new heights. As she finally made her way to the parking garage, Simone's phone buzzed with a text from Brandon, David's nephew. Aunt Simone, I saw you on the news. You're famous. Mom says you're the smartest lady she knows. Simone smiled, remembering the innocent 8-year-old whose simple question had started this entire journey. His curiosity about her work had been the catalyst for the most painful and ultimately most liberating period of her life. She typed back, thank you, sweetie. See you at Sunday dinner next week? The response came immediately, yes. Mom says you're making your famous mac and cheese. Simone laughed as she got into her car. Sunday dinners with the Carter family had resumed 2 months earlier, but now they were different. Now she was there as herself, successful, confident, and valued. Lisa hosted, and Gloria and Robert attended, all of them still working to understand and accept the new family dynamics. David never came, of course. He had moved to another city and taken a position with a smaller firm, starting over both professionally and personally. Simone heard updates occasionally through Lisa, but she felt no animosity toward him anymore. Just sadness for the life they might have had if he had been capable of loving her for who she really was. As Simone drove through downtown Atlanta toward her penthouse, she passed the Carter Industries building where her journey to authenticity had begun with a confrontation in the lobby. The building looked the same from the outside, but everything inside had changed. She was no longer hiding behind email addresses and intermediaries. She was present at board meetings, visible at company events, and actively engaged with clients who now knew exactly who they were working with. The company culture had transformed as employees saw their leaders' authentic confidence and felt permission to bring their own full selves to work. Pulling into her building's parking garage, Simone reflected on how much her life had changed in just 6 months. She had gone from hiding to healing, from victim to victor, from secret to celebrated. But the best part wasn't the success or the recognition. The best part was the peace that came from living in complete alignment with who she really was. Her phone buzzed with one final message of the day, this one from Mama Pat. Watched your speech online, baby girl. Your great-grandmother would be so proud. You finally learned to let your light shine. Simone smiled as she rode the elevator up to her penthouse, her great-grandmother's silk scarf flowing gently around her shoulders like a blessing from the past and a promise for the future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new chances to live authentically. But tonight, she was simply grateful to be exactly who she was, exactly where she belonged. 1 year after the infamous family dinner, Simone stood in the kitchen of her penthouse, preparing dishes for a very different kind of gathering. The dining room table was set for 12, a celebration dinner for the Montgomery Foundation's first anniversary and the announcement of its expansion into 3 new cities. The guest list represented the community of strong women who had supported her through her transformation. Mama Pat, Jasmine, Elena, Lisa Carter, Dr. Sarah Kim, the therapist who had helped her process her experience, Judge Denise Thompson, who had become a friend and foundation board member, and several other women whose lives had intersected with hers over the past year. Need any help in there? Jasmine called from the living room, where she was arranging flowers with Lisa. I've got it, Simone called back, stirring the mac and cheese that had become her signature dish. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was preparing comfort food for a celebration of her professional success, a perfect symbol of how she had learned to integrate all aspects of herself. The doorbell rang and Simone heard Mama Pat's voice greeting the arriving guests. At 68, her grandmother's sister moved a little slower than she used to, but her spirit was as fierce as ever. She had become the unofficial grandmother figure for all the women in Simone's chosen family. "Simone," came a young voice from the living room. "I brought you something." Simone wiped her hands and walked out to find Brandon Carter, now 9 years old, holding a handmade card. His presence represented one of the most meaningful developments of the past year, his continued relationship with Simone despite the divorce. "What's this, sweetheart?" Simone asked, kneeling to his level. "It's a thank you card for helping my mom at work," Brandon said seriously. "She told me you've been teaching her how to be a better boss." Simone's eyes met Lisa's across the room. Lisa had been promoted to VP of Marketing 3 months earlier, a recognition of skills that had flourished once she began working openly with Simone instead of through intermediaries. "Your mom is doing amazing work," Simone told Brandon. "She's one of the smartest people I know. She says you taught her that smart women should help other smart women instead of competing," Brandon continued. "And that families can change and still be families." Lisa's eyes filled with tears. The work of rebuilding their relationship had been ongoing and sometimes difficult, but moments like this reminded them both why it was worth the effort. "That's exactly right," Simone said, giving Brandon a hug before he ran off to explore the penthouse with the wonder that only children possess. As the evening progressed, the conversation around the dinner table ranged from business strategy to personal growth to social justice. These women came from different backgrounds and generations, but they were united by a shared commitment to living authentically and supporting each other's success. "Simone," Judge Thompson said as they moved to the living room for dessert, "I wanted you to know that your case has been used as a precedent in 3 other domestic abuse proceedings this year. Your courage to speak truthfully about emotional abuse has helped other women find their voices." "That means more to me than any business award," Simone replied. "If something good can come from what I went through, then it was worth it." Dr. Sarah Kim, who had helped Simone process the trauma of her marriage and develop healthier relationship patterns, leaned forward. "Simone, you've come so far from the woman who first sat in my office. Do you remember what you said that first day?" Simone smiled. "I said I wasn't sure if I was crazy for staying or crazy for leaving. And what do you know now?" "I know that I was never crazy. I was just afraid of taking up space in my own life." Elena Rodriguez raised her wine glass. "Speaking of taking up space, should we tell them about the Forbes cover?" The room erupted in excitement as Simone tried to wave off the attention. "It's not confirmed yet." "Forbes?" Mama Pat's voice carried across the room. "My baby's going to be on the cover of Forbes?" "The article is about women entrepreneurs who've overcome personal challenges to build successful businesses," Simone explained. "They want to feature the foundation's work alongside my business story." "This calls for champagne," Jasmine declared, already heading toward the kitchen. As glasses were filled and toasts offered, Simone felt overwhelmed by gratitude for the community of women surrounding her. A year ago, she had been isolated and afraid, convinced that her success had to be hidden to preserve her marriage. Now she was surrounded by people who celebrated her achievements and supported her continued growth. "I want to say something," Simone said, standing with her champagne glass. "A year ago, I thought I had to choose between being loved and being successful. I thought I had to make myself smaller to make room for someone else's ego. You all taught me that the right people will love me because of my strength, not in spite of it." "Amen to that," Mama Pat called out, raising her own glass. "The Montgomery Foundation has provided grants and mentorship to over 200 women entrepreneurs this year," Simone continued. "But more than that, it's created a community where women can support each other's dreams without apology or limitation." She looked around the room at faces that had become family, some by choice, some by chance, all by love. "Next month, we're opening our second location in Memphis, and by the end of the year, we'll be in Birmingham and Nashville as well. We're not just funding businesses, we're funding freedom. The freedom to dream big, work hard, and take up all the space you deserve in this world." The applause that followed was warm and heartfelt, but it was Mama Pat who had the last word. "Baby girl," she said, her voice carrying the wisdom of decades, "your great-grandmother started with one small business and the courage to believe she deserved success. Look what you've built from that foundation. Imagine what the women you're helping today will build tomorrow." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Lisa lingered to help with cleanup. She and Simone worked in comfortable silence, their relationship having evolved into something deeper than obligation or courtesy. "Simone," Lisa said as they finished loading the dishwasher, "I want you to know that David asked me to pass along a message." Simone tensed slightly. She hadn't heard from her ex-husband in months and she preferred it that way. "He wanted me to tell you that he's been going to therapy," Lisa continued. "He wanted you to know that he understands now how badly he treated you and he's sorry." Simone considered this information carefully. "How do you feel about that?" "Honestly, I'm glad he's getting help. But I also know that his apologies don't undo the years of damage he caused. And they certainly don't obligate you to forgive him or respond to him." "You're right on both counts," Simone said. "I hope therapy helps him become a better person for his future relationships. But my healing isn't dependent on his apologies." Lisa nodded. "I love that you're able to say that. A year ago, you would have agonized over whether you owed him forgiveness." "A year ago I thought I owed everyone everything," Simone replied. "Now I know I only owe myself the truth." After Lisa left, Simone sat alone in her living room, looking out at the Atlanta skyline. The city lights twinkled like stars and she could see the Carter Industries building in the distance. Her building, her company, her legacy. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Ms. Montgomery, this is Janet Williams from the Foundation Program. I wanted you to know that I just signed my second major retail contract. Thank you for believing in my dream when I couldn't afford to believe in it myself." Simone smiled as she typed back. "The dream was always yours, Janet. I just helped provide the resources for you to pursue it. Congratulations on your success." These messages came regularly now. Updates from women whose businesses were thriving, whose confidence was growing, whose lives were changing because someone had invested in their potential. Each one reminded Simone why she had chosen to step out of the shadows and into her power. As she prepared for bed, Simone caught sight of herself in the bedroom mirror. The woman looking back at her was confident, successful, and authentically herself. Gone was the apologetic posture and careful expression she had worn for years. In their place was the radiant presence of someone who knew her own worth. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, the pain of hiding, the trauma of revelation, the hard work of healing, and the joy of authentic living. Every step had been necessary to become the woman she was today. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities. There would be more women to mentor, more businesses to fund, more barriers to break down. But tonight, Simone Montgomery was exactly where she belonged, confident in her power, surrounded by love and ready to face whatever came next. As she drifted off to sleep, she could swear she felt her great-grandmother's presence, along with all the strong women who had paved the way for this moment of complete, unapologetic authenticity. The girl who had once hidden her light to preserve someone else's comfort had become a woman who helped other women find their own illumination. And that transformation had been worth every moment of pain it took to achieve. 5 years had passed since the dinner that changed everything. Simone stood before the bathroom mirror in her downtown Atlanta penthouse, adjusting the same silk scarf that had given her courage on that first night when she decided to stop hiding. Now 47, she radiated a confidence that came from years of living authentically and building something meaningful beyond herself. Today was special. The Montgomery Foundation was celebrating its 5th anniversary with the opening of its 10th location, this one in Detroit. But more than that, today marked the official launch of the Montgomery Leadership Institute, a program designed to train the next generation of women business leaders. "You ready for today?" Jasmine asked, emerging from the guest bedroom where she had spent the night after flying in from Los Angeles, where she now ran the Foundation's West Coast operations. "More than ready," Simone replied, touching the silk scarf one final time before they headed to the car. The drive to the Foundation's Atlanta headquarters took them through the heart of the city, past the Carter Industries building where Simone's journey to authenticity had begun. The company had continued to flourish under her open leadership, now employing over 300 people and generating $100 million in annual revenue. But it was no longer the center of her identity, it was simply one part of a life lived in full. "Remember when you used to be terrified that people would find out you were successful?" Jasmine asked as they pulled up to the Foundation building. "I remember thinking that my success would make me unlovable," Simone replied. "Turns out the opposite was true. Hiding my success made me unavailable for real love." The Foundation building was buzzing with activity as staff prepared for the day's events. Over the past 5 years, the organization had provided grants and mentorship to over 2,000 women entrepreneurs, with a 92% success rate. The women they had supported now employed thousands of people and generated millions in economic activity across the Southeast. "Ms. Montgomery," called out Janet Williams, who now served as the foundation's director of alumni relations. The sustainable clothing line she had started with a foundation grant 5 years earlier now employed 50 people and had become a national brand. "Janet, how are the preparations going?" "Everything's ready. We have over 500 people registered for today's events, including 50 women who are graduating from this year's Leadership Institute program." Simone felt a surge of pride. The Leadership Institute had been her latest innovation, a year-long program that combined business training with personal development, helping women not just build companies but build confidence in themselves as leaders. "And the surprise guest?" Janet grinned. "Confirmed and on her way. I think you're going to be very pleased." 2 hours later, Simone stood at the podium in the foundation's main conference room, looking out at an audience that represented 5 years of community building. There were current grant recipients, program graduates, board members, staff, and supporters, all united by a belief in women's potential and the power of authentic leadership. 5 years ago, Simone began, I stood in this very room, well, in the much smaller room we used to call our headquarters, and announced the founding of the Montgomery Foundation. I had just emerged from a period of hiding my own success, and I wanted to create a space where other women would never have to diminish themselves to pursue their dreams. The audience included many familiar faces: Lisa Carter, now the CEO of her own marketing firm; Elena Rodriguez, who had left Carter Industries to become the foundation's chief operating officer; Dr. Sarah Kim, who provided therapy services to program participants; and Mama Pat, now 72, sitting in the front row with tears of pride in her eyes. "What we've built together goes beyond the numbers, impressive as they are," Simone continued. "We've created a community where women support each other's success instead of competing for limited resources. We've proven that when we invest in women's authentic potential, the returns benefit entire communities." She clicked to the next slide, which showed photos of some of their most successful grant recipients. Women who had started with $5,000 or $10,000 loans and built multimillion-dollar enterprises. But today, I want to talk about something even more important than business success. I want to talk about the courage to live authentically, even when it's difficult. Simone paused, letting her eyes sweep across the audience. 10 years ago, I was married to a man who spat in my face because his nephew asked me about my job. I had spent 5 years hiding my success from my own husband because I was afraid that my achievements would threaten his ego. I thought love meant making myself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. A hush fell over the room. Even though many people knew this story, hearing Simone tell it never failed to impact listeners. That night, I learned that authentic love doesn't ask you to diminish yourself. Real love celebrates your light and encourages you to shine brighter. The people who truly belong in your life will support your success, not feel threatened by it. Spontaneous applause broke out, but Simone raised her hand to continue. "Which brings me to today's special announcement," she said, her voice taking on a note of excitement. "The Montgomery Leadership Institute is expanding beyond business training. We're launching a new program called Authentic Lives, a support system for women who are ready to stop hiding who they really are." The audience erupted in enthusiastic applause. This was the program Simone had been dreaming about for years. A way to help women navigate the transition from hiding to authenticity in all areas of their lives. Whether you're hiding your intelligence to make others comfortable, downplaying your achievements to preserve relationships, or simply afraid to take up space in your own life, this program will provide the tools and community support you need to live boldly and authentically. Janet Williams appeared at the side of the stage, nodding to indicate that their surprise guest had arrived. "Now," Simone said, "I'd like to introduce someone very special. Someone who inspired me to find my courage and never give up on my dreams. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Angela Davis." The room exploded as the legendary activist and scholar walked onto the stage. Dr. Davis, now in her 80s, moved with the dignity and power that had made her an icon of courage for generations of women. As the two women embraced on stage, Simone felt the weight of history and the power of legacy. Here was a woman who had never hidden her brilliance, never apologized for her strength, never allowed others to diminish her light. "Dr. Davis," Simone said as they took seats for what was planned as a public conversation, "you've spent your entire life refusing to make yourself smaller for other people's comfort. What advice do you have for women who are just learning to claim their power?" Dr. Davis smiled, her eyes twinkling with decades of hard-won wisdom. "First, understand that your liberation is connected to everyone else's liberation. When you free yourself from the need to hide your brilliance, you create space for other women to do the same. And when people are threatened by your success, let them be threatened, Dr. Davis replied with a laugh that carried across the auditorium. Their discomfort is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to use your gifts to make the world better. The conversation continued for an hour, covering topics from business leadership to social justice to the importance of community in sustaining authentic living. When it ended, both women received a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. As the formal events concluded and moved into the evening reception, Simone found herself in conversation with 3 women who had graduated from the Leadership Institute that morning. Each had a different story: a former teacher who had started an educational technology company, a single mother who had built a successful catering business, and a recent college graduate who had launched a nonprofit focused on environmental justice. Ms. Montgomery, the recent graduate said, "I wanted to thank you for teaching us that we don't have to choose between being successful and being authentic. Before this program, I thought I had to hide my passion for activism to be taken seriously in business." Now she's running a nonprofit that just secured a $1 million grant from the EPA, added the former teacher. Turns out authentic passion is exactly what the world needs. As the evening wound down, Simone stood on the foundation building's rooftop terrace, looking out at the Atlanta skyline. The city lights sparkled like diamonds, and she could see the Carter Industries building in the distance. A reminder of how far she had traveled from the woman who once hid her success in the shadows. Mama Pat joined her on the terrace, moving slowly but with determination. At 72, she remained Simone's most trusted advisor and fiercest supporter. "How you feeling, baby girl?" Mama Pat asked, settling into a chair beside where Simone stood. "Grateful," Simone replied. "Overwhelmed by gratitude for this life, these people, this opportunity to help other women find their courage." "Your great-grandmother would be so proud," Mama Pat said, her voice soft with emotion. "She started with one little business and the belief that she deserved success. Look what grew from that seed." Simone sat down beside her beloved grandmother figure, feeling the weight of generations of strong women who had paved the way for this moment. "Mama Pat, do you think she ever imagined something like this? The foundation, the institute, all these women supporting each other? Baby, I think she knew that when one woman finds her courage, it creates ripples that reach places she can't even imagine. Your courage to stop hiding has given thousands of other women permission to stop hiding too." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the city pulse with life below them. "What's next?" Mama Pat asked. Simone smiled, thinking about the plans she had been developing for months. "I'm writing a book. About the journey from hiding to healing, from victim to victor. And I'm thinking about running for city council. This city has given me so much, I want to give back in a bigger way." "Politics?" Mama Pat raised an eyebrow. "You sure you're ready for that level of public scrutiny?" "I'm ready to use my voice and my platform to advocate for policies that support women entrepreneurs and domestic violence survivors," Simone replied. "If my story can help other women find their courage, then I want to tell it as widely as possible." Later that night, back in her penthouse, Simone sat at her computer responding to messages from the day's events. There were congratulations from colleagues, thank you notes from program participants, and requests for interviews from national media outlets. But the message that meant the most came from an unexpected source. Brandon Carter, now 14 years old. "Aunt Simone," he had texted, "I watched the live stream of your event today. I'm so proud to know you. Thank you for teaching me that smart, strong women should be celebrated, not hidden. You've changed how I think about what women can do. Brandon." Simone wiped tears from her eyes as she typed back. "Brandon, you've been asking important questions since you were 8 years old. Keep asking them. The world needs young men like you who celebrate women's strength instead of feeling threatened by it." As she prepared for bed, Simone caught sight of herself in the mirror one final time. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the one who had once apologized for existing. This woman stood tall, spoke boldly, and used her success to lift others. She thought about David sometimes, wondering if he had found peace and growth in his new life. Lisa occasionally shared updates. He had remarried, seemed happier, and had apparently learned from their divorce to support his new wife's career ambitions. Simone felt no anger toward him anymore, just sadness for the relationship they might have had if he had been capable of loving her for who she really was. But that sadness was overwhelmed by gratitude for the life she had built from the ashes of that failed marriage. A life filled with purpose, community, and the deep satisfaction of living authentically. As she drifted off to sleep, Simone felt her great-grandmother's presence one final time, not as a ghost or vision, but as a living legacy of courage that flowed through the silk scarf draped over the chair beside her bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to support women finding their voices. There would be more grants to award, more programs to develop, more barriers to break down. But tonight, Simone Montgomery rested in the peace that comes from a life lived without apology, a light that had learned to shine brightly and would never dim again. The little girl who had once hidden her brilliance to preserve someone else's comfort had become a woman who helped other women illuminate the world. And in that transformation she had found not just success, but the true meaning of a life well lived. The crystal chandelier above the Carter family dining table cast warm light across faces that had gathered for what should have been a celebration. 23 people filled the mahogany chairs around the extended table. 3 generations of the Carter family come together to honor David's supposed promotion to senior vice president at Carter Industries. Simone Carter sat quietly at the far end of the table, her dark hands folded in her lap, watching her husband of 5 years hold court. Her natural hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and she wore a modest navy dress that hid the designer labels she could easily afford. To everyone present, she was just David's quiet wife who worked some small administrative job while he climbed the corporate ladder. "And that's how I closed the Morrison deal," David announced, his voice booming with pride as he gestured with his wine glass. $15 million in revenue, all because I knew exactly how to handle those executives. Gloria Carter, David's mother, beamed at her son from her seat at the head of the table. "We are so proud of you, honey. Running that whole company practically by yourself." Simone's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The Morrison deal had been her brainchild, negotiated through late nights and careful relationship building. She had briefed David on every detail so he could present it to the board, a board that didn't know she was actually their CEO, operating under her maiden name through a complex trust structure her grandfather had helped establish. "David's always been destined for greatness," his father Robert added, raising his glass. "Unlike some people who just coast along." The comment was clearly directed at Simone, as were the subtle glances around the table. She had endured 5 years of these gatherings, 5 years of being treated as the quiet, unsuccessful wife who didn't contribute much to the family legacy. 8-year-old Brandon, David's nephew, piped up from his seat near Simone. "Aunt Simone, what do you do at work?" The table fell silent. It was an innocent question from a child, but it cut through the dinner conversation like a knife. Simone felt every eye turned toward her, waiting for her to mumble something about filing papers or answering phones. "She works in administration," David said quickly, not letting Simone answer for herself. "Basic office stuff. Nothing too important." "But Aunt Simone is really smart," Brandon continued, his young voice full of genuine admiration. "She helped me with my math homework last time, and she knew everything about business when I asked her about my lemonade stand." David's face darkened. "Brandon, eat your dinner." Simone finally spoke, her voice soft but clear. "I do work in administration. I help make sure everything runs smoothly." It wasn't a lie exactly. As CEO, she did administer the entire company. But the truth felt impossible to speak in this room, where she had spent years being diminished and dismissed. "See," David said with a laugh that held no warmth. "Nothing too exciting. Good thing one of us has a real career." Lisa, David's sister, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. As the marketing director at Carter Industries, she actually worked directly under Simone, though she knew her only as S. Montgomery, the mysterious CEO who communicated primarily through intermediaries and email. "David," Lisa said carefully, "maybe we shouldn't?" "Shouldn't what?" David's voice grew louder, the wine clearly affecting his judgment. "Talk about success? Talk about who actually contributes to this family." Simone felt her grandmother's words echo in her mind. "Baby girl, sometimes you got to let people show you exactly who they are before you can decide what to do about it." "You know what your problem is, Simone?" David continued, standing now, his 6-foot frame towering over the table. "You have no ambition. No drive. You're content to just exist while real people do real work." The room was completely silent now except for the soft clink of silverware as people tried to pretend they weren't witnessing this humiliation. "I work hard," Simone said quietly, her hands steady despite the storm building inside her chest. David laughed, a harsh sound that made several family members flinch. "Work hard? What? Making copies? Getting coffee? You wouldn't last 5 minutes in my world." Simone stood slowly, her movements graceful despite the tension radiating from every muscle in her body. "I think maybe I should go." "Sit down," David commanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "We're not done here." The power in his voice was unmistakable, the same tone he used when he wanted to control her at home, when he made her feel small and worthless. But something was different this time. Maybe it was the presence of little Brandon, whose innocent questions had reminded her of who she really was. Maybe it was the weight of 5 years of lies pressing down on her shoulders. Or maybe it was simply that she was tired of hiding.